So we're improvising a little bit since you can't see the screens from the stage.
We're going to get Richard Gage, AIA, up here front and center for you all. Richard Gage is the leader of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and he's going to be presenting. He's been to Atlanta several times. I believe this is his third engagement. And if you want to find out more about Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, my name's Mikey Smith. I'm one of the now over more than 1,800 architects and engineers that have signed the petition demanding a new investigation into 9/11. Yeah. We have a table right over here. You can check us out. We're going to get Richard wired here so he can give you his little presentation. But we are a truth community here in Atlanta. We are architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. We are change. And we have folks here from all over the country and all over the world. And Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth has action groups here in Atlanta and Georgia, Tennessee. We are all over the country and all over the world. And We Are Change is right there rocking alongside us. So we've been working. All right, I'm going to introduce you. Our speaker this evening has been an architect for 24 years in the San Francisco Bay Area and is a member of the prestigious American Institute of Architects. He is a professional willing to place his credibility and reputation on the line, who has endured substantial personal sacrifice, a tireless and tenacious advocate for questions that all too few are willing to ask, and truths that fewer still are willing to face, truths that may shake the foundations of our worldview. His deep concern about the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center high-rises on September the 11th, 2001 began after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, Dr. David Ray Griffin. Dr. Griffin was interviewed that eye-opening day in May of 2006 on KPFA's Guns and Butter radio program by Bonnie Faulkner in Berkeley, California, where Richard lives. This changed our speaker's life radically and launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11, inspiring him to found the organization, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. AE 911 Truth now numbers over 1,800 architects and engineers and more than 15,000 others, all demanding a new investigation into these catastrophic structural failures. Our speaker has presented to over 150 packed out audiences of 100 to 3,000 people whose worldview has been irrevocably altered by this myth-shattering information. He's a personal source of inspiration to me, a personal hero. I consider him to be a beacon of truth, a people's patriot, and a friend. Please give a warm round of applause, Atlanta, for Mr. Richard Gage, AIA.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here in Atlanta with you. Let's get right into it. Why are we looking at 9/11? Well, what happened as a result of 9/11? We have 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq. Over 1 million people have been killed. We've lost 6,000 soldiers. And as you heard earlier today, more than that by suicide alone. We have instituted in this country, through the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, draconian measures in which today you or I can be taken, charged without charge, held without charge, not given a right to a trial or even have a lawyer, and we can even be tortured. This is legal, quasi-legal today through these through the National Defense Authorization Act. There's a host of other ills, as you're aware, Homeland Security, TSA, et cetera, that have come into effect as a result of 9/11. Now, some of you are so young that you don't even know what happened on 9/11, perhaps. In this room, different, right? But let's take a look.
On September 11th, we learned that 4 passenger planes were hijacked and taken radically off course. Within an hour, 2 of the planes had flown into the enormous steel towers of the World Trade Center, creating fires and eventually toppling them. by the news, the American public soon believed the fires in the towers had burned so hot they caused the steel frames of the buildings to give way. A myth developed, fed by official sources through the media to a bewildered audience. Elements of the myth. The impact of the airplanes, gallons of burning jet fuel, steel melting, the buildings failing and suddenly imploding. In a mere 10 seconds, 110 stories hurtled earthward, pulverizing into dust. Right from the start, on the street itself, the official story was born.
Come out of nowhere and just scream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
The myth bled into the FEMA report.
You got it.
And was echoed by the experts.
It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire, that caused collapse.
Well, there's the official story, pretty much in a nutshell, right off the street from the first guy who's interviewed, the guy with the Fox News hat. So the officials have been arguing about this, but what I want to bring your attention to now is a typical controlled demolition. We have hundreds from across the country to make our comparison, because this is the most common method to bring down high-rises. And in fact, they do that by placing thousands of cutter charges throughout the columns and beams in these buildings to bring them down. So this is a typical controlled demolition, and they have a list of characteristic features, which we're going to see many of in not only the Twin Towers, but in Building 7. These are all direct evidence, these features, of controlled demolition. And guess what? Fire can't create any one of them, let alone all 10 of them. Especially if we have additional corroborating circumstantial evidence, experts agree. We have the foreknowledge of these events because they take months to plan and to place these explosives. This is all proof of controlled demolition. Now, with this in mind, we're going to take a look at the third skyscraper to collapse on 9/11. This is World Trade Center Building 7. It's easily the tallest building in most of our states. In New York, it was dwarfed in appearance next to the Twin Towers, which were the tallest buildings in the world at one time. Now, Building 7 on the left here was not hit by an airplane. So we're going to take a look at it first because it's absolutely fascinating. It's about a football field in length away from the Twin Towers. And as you can see, it's standing here after the Twin Towers have collapsed or been destroyed, as you will see in a moment. Now, they have a list of features also of their destruction. Building 7 does. Is there any similarity to those features of a typical controlled demolition? Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the building? Well, let's listen to Dan Rather give his narration of the descent of this building.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building. It's amazing, incredible picture word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Well, this is Dan Rather giving us his intuition of what happened, which is what newscasters should be doing, right? Investigative reporting based on their experience. This is pretty extraordinary. Yes, it's a sudden onset of destruction. This building came down at 5:20 in the afternoon after the Twin Towers had already been destroyed. Let's take a look at it from West Street and see if there is a symmetrical descent. The top comes down first, the penthouse, and then a complete descent in just under 7 seconds. Pretty symmetrical. How does that happen? Well, we'll get to that. Let's take a look now, because I'm not quite convinced. On the left side is World Trade Center 7. On the right side is a controlled demolition. Let's see if there's any similarity. Now, we're told that fires brought Building 7 down. As you can see, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and yet NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, claimed that there was no explosives found, and wasn't destroyed by explosives. They went straight after the hypothesis of destruction by office fires, normal office fires. No jet fuel, remember, no plane hit this building. And these are those fires that are claimed to have brought this building down. And yet, these fires were out over an hour before the building came down, in the area which NIST claims the initiation of that collapse happened by, quote, thermal expansion. Is this possible? Fire is an organic process that moves through a building and given an area every 20 minutes or so, moving on looking for fresh new fuel sources. So when there's a collapse by fire, and never have we had one in a in a steel frame building, but say in a wood frame building, you'd have a chaotic, slow, organic type of collapse. And by the way, this building comes down almost completely into its own footprint. How do we bring a building straight down like this? They have to take out all 80 columns on each floor virtually simultaneously. And for at least 8 floors, because that is the period of time, 100 feet to over 2 seconds of pure free fall. That is fast. There is no resistance in the descent of this building. So the question is, can fire take out all of those columns at once so that the building doesn't tip over? We all know the answer to that. How fast does this building come down? You can see it gaining downward momentum without resistance. It's getting faster and faster with each second. So in under 7 seconds, this building is completely destroyed and down at the bottom into a pile. Now this was a moment frame steel structure where the columns and beams are very rigidly welded to each other. It would not have collapsed into a nice neat pile about 4 or 6 stories tall if it was going to collapse at all. We see huge mangled portions of the building falling over on other portions of the building too. Do we have sounds of explosions? Here's Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, who is one of several witnesses of explosions.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom, and it's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. To me, I knew that was an explosion. There's no doubt in my mind.
Not one of these credible witnesses or their experience of explosions appears in any of the official reports. And this is true for the Twin Towers as well. Explosions like these, perhaps.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, look. You want to call your mother or something?
Wouldn't you think that NIST would think it necessary to report this, all this evidence of explosions? Now, this is all direct evidence of explosive destruction. Fire can't create any one of them. If fire was going to bring down one of the World Trade Center buildings, it would have been this one, World Trade Center 5. Did it? No. Fires do not bring down steel frame high-rises or mid-rises. And completely into its own footprint, where every steel frame member is dismembered from another. How does that happen? And what do the experts say? Those without $10,000, $100,000 contracts with the federal government. In this case, overseas. European controlled demolition expert Danny Jawenko, 27 years in the business, starts from the below. They've blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. It's professional work, without a doubt. That's pretty damning evidence. How about foreknowledge? Did they know about this building beforehand? Listen to these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7 hearing an explosion, looking back over their shoulder, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this. Fascinating. Flame and debris coming down, the building's about to blow up. How do they know? This is all direct evidence of explosive destruction. Fire can't account for any of these, with the additional circumstantial evidence, which you'll be able to see all of, by the way. We only have 20 minutes to give you the oversight here, but we do have a video, as you'll see. It's all proof of controlled demolition beyond a reasonable doubt. So what we want you to do is come over to our booth and sign up so you can get the latest evidence, hear our latest and best efforts toward getting a real investigation, and find out what actions we're taking and that we want you to take. Everybody can do something. And I'll give you more on that in a moment after we look at the Twin Towers. Because as clear as the evidence is for most of you, for the destruction by controlled demolition of Building 7, the evidence relative to the Twin Towers is even greater. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction? That wouldn't be at the base of the building, but up where the jet plane impacts. Why? Because these are deceptive controlled demolitions. They want us to believe that those planes and the jet fuel were responsible for the destruction of these buildings. As you'll see, though, there are witnesses again that hear sounds of explosions. In fact, there's 118 of them who were recorded orally by the city's fire chief commissioner. In August of 2005, this finally came out of the legal system. We didn't even know about it. None of these testimonies are a part of the official story whatsoever. It has been rewritten. Here's a couple of them. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. Initially just one flash, then it just kept popping all the way around the building, and the building has started to explode. One floor under another. It was like a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. Now you'll see in those explosions here as well when we compare World Trade Center 1 on the right and a known controlled demolition on the left. You have a sudden onset of destruction, a belt of explosions, a virtual free-fall descent of the top of the building. Very extraordinary. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. I saw low-level flashes. The building was blowing out on all four sides. You actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building popping out. An orange and then red flash out of the building that would just go around on both sides. Now here's the South Tower on the right, a known controlled demolition on the left. Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? I saw a flash, 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 then it looked like the building came down. So flashes, explosions, then the building coming down in that order. Here is the destruction of the North Tower in slow motion, and we have belts of explosions just like you heard from the first responders, all the way around. Look on the low and then in the high. This upper part is being destroyed in the first 4 seconds. Look, we're told that this upper portion drove the rest of the building down to the ground. As you can see, it's being destroyed in the first 4 seconds itself. There's no motion from that bottom red line downward. Let's take a look now. We're told that pile driver drove the rest of the building down, but after 3 seconds or 4 seconds, there is no pile driver driving the rest of that building down to the ground, visible in any of the videos. What we do see is what looks more like a massive series of explosions. In this case, a volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea in 2009. Look at upward, outward, almost a geometry of fireworks Are you looking at a collapse of a building, or are you looking at a massive series of explosions with pyroclastic-like clouds following these laterally ejected pulverized building materials and structural steel sections? Well, do we have a symmetrical progression? Yes. 207-foot wide building, and it's perfectly symmetrical all the way down to the ground in a 1,400-foot diameter, well beyond the boundaries of ground zero, is where this debris is. Here's a nice neat pile of building 7 across from the Twin Towers destruction. And so let's take a look and see how fast is this building falling. Here's 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. About a dozen seconds, both of these buildings are completely destroyed. Almost every structural steel element from another. In 12 seconds, that progression of destruction is traveling through this massive steel exoskeleton. An extraordinary degree of steel on the perimeter, more than any other high-rise in history, actually. And it's giving way as if it wasn't even there. Doesn't make any sense. A complete steel frame skeleton, dismembered from every other. Now here's the South Tower tipping 25 degrees off center, theoretically continuing its lateral angular momentum. You'd expect that to fall on the ground in one piece, but it doesn't. It simply disappears in this massive cloud. And what happens is, after that, complete symmetrical destruction all the way down to the ground. It's extraordinary. With laterally ejected free-flying objects, watch these individual sections landing 300 to 600 feet away from the perimeter of the structure. And this one in particular, right there, free-flying, not peeling like a banana, but free-flying individual structural steel sections, in which at the bottom there's not much left there, a 1 or 2 story pile. Where are the pancakes? In a pancaking or gravitational collapse like this one on the right, from an earthquake in San Francisco, I believe, we would expect to see 110 floors there were in these buildings. That's a lot of floors. How many do we find at the bottom? 50? No. 10? No, not even 1. And that concrete is completely pulverized down to 100 microns. It's like dust. And it's being pulverized in mid-air, not after the gravitational potential energy can crush it down at the bottom. And it's completely covering lower Manhattan from river to river in a 4 to 12-inch thick blanket. And what we find in the bottom of these piles is just as extraordinary. Here's a structural engineer who says, I remember seeing red-hot steel being pulled from deep within the pile. Pools of literally molten steel, says the president of the cleanup company. Dripping from the molten steel. How is the steel getting this hot? Seeing molten steel.
You get down below and you see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like
volcano.
Steel members in the debris pile appear to have been completely evaporated. This takes 4,000 degree temperatures. What can cause that? I assure you, jet fuel cannot. Nor can jet fuel cause the complete corrosion of the ends of these steel beams like Swiss cheese. Like this is a beam from one of the few or 2 beams that were saved from building 7. One had partially evaporated, and the other one is looking like Swiss cheese. This is molten concrete. Did you know that concrete can melt? I didn't even know this. 3,000 degrees it takes. What are the temperatures that cause dripping molten steel or molten iron, as it turns out to be, from here? And we have meteorites. They used to call them, bringing up tons of fused molten concrete and molten steel, they call it. Well, Interestingly enough, the fires themselves can only get to be about 800, maybe 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. But steel doesn't melt until 2800 degrees Fahrenheit, like twice these temperatures. What can create those temperatures? Interestingly enough, thermite is a likely suspect, and let's find out what thermite is.
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, maybe now we're getting somewhere. Do we find evidence, though, of that thermite in the dust? Well, the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey themselves, finds billions of tiny iron microspheres. They can't explain where they came from, but they're iron, they're elemental iron, they're not molten steel, they're not from melted steel. Where did 10,000 tons of molten iron droplets, the diameter of a human hair, come from? Fascinating. Up to 6% of the dust in most of these samples is this molten iron. Well, here's a source where they might be able to come from. This is thermite. When you ignite thermite, it creates tens of thousands of small iron droplets which fall into the pan just like this, which have very specific chemical characteristics which are exactly what is found in the World Trade Center dust. So there's evidence of the byproduct of thermite in the World Trade Center dust. But is there any evidence of unignited thermite? So a small team of scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen goes back to the dust and 4 independently collected samples finds the exact same thing. These small red-gray chips, they come up to the magnet because they have iron in them. They zoom into these chips and they do a chemical analysis and determine that they have carbon, aluminum, silica, iron, oxygen, key ingredients of thermite. What is thermite doing in the World Trade Center dust? Interesting. Well, they zoom into the red layer here 50,000 times and they find something that is absolutely extraordinary. They find small rhomboidal shapes of iron particles that are 1,000 times smaller than a human hair. And they find aluminum particles in this red layer inside these chips that are also 1,000 times small. These are nanoparticles. These are engineered from the atomic scale up. You don't put iron powder in a blender and get this stuff. It is extremely sophisticated and it's set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. This would give it more explosive properties. As a matter of fact, when they put these chips in a heater, or a differential scanning calorimeter, for those of you who know what that is, what they find is that they ignite at 420 degrees centigrade, less than 1,000 Fahrenheit. And what happens when they ignite? They produce lots and lots of iron microspheres. And in fact, those iron microspheres have the exact same chemical characteristics of the iron microspheres found in the World Trade Center dust. So we know exactly where they came from, as if we didn't already, because many of those iron microspheres are found attached to these partially ignited red-gray chips. It's really quite extraordinary. So, in fact, this is a completely self-consistent set of data. It's the best experimental data and materials that you can and with conclusions that you can come up with in the scientific method. It just doesn't get any better than this. In fact, these materials were developed in Los Alamos Lawrence Livermore Lab prior to 9/11. They're not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is extremely sophisticated material made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So you can begin to see where we would like to see an investigation. In the meantime, it is absolutely clear that we have evidence of explosive destruction of not only Building 7, but the Twin Towers as well. None of these characteristic features can be created by fire. None of them, let alone all of them. With additional corroborating supportive evidence, this is proof of controlled demolition. So we want you to follow up. We have a DVD with 43 technical experts, high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, fire protection engineers, and explosive demolition experts, all giving their testimony, and it gets even absolutely clear. Nobody sees this and with a half of an open mind and comes away disagreeing anymore. So it's called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. It's $20. It's on our table right out this door and to the left. We also can provide this DVD and our other DVDs. I've given a 2-hour presentation right through all of the evidence, which you can also use quite well. In fact, if you don't think your colleague, associate, family member, or friend can handle 2 hours of me, we've cut it down to 60 minutes, and also 30 minutes and even 10 minutes. So there's no excuses. We also have a 15-minute mini documentary just on World Trade Center 7, narrated by Ed Asner, and it's extraordinary. It's the best presentation of the evidence for World Trade Center 7 yet. And we use World Trade Center 7 because it cuts through all the BS that people have in their mind about how these towers came down. Because Building 7, most people don't know anything about. So it becomes quite clear. They're then open to talking about what happened to the Twin Towers. So you can go to our website. We have passed out flyers. How many of you did not get a flyer from us today? Raise your hand real tight if you did not. You can pick one up right out here if you would. Pick up a couple, in fact, pass them out. Go to the website and sign up for our petition. Not just architects and engineers, but everybody else can sign. And donate, help us. We are surviving by donations. We have a couple of hundred sustaining supporters, people who provide monthly support to 8911 Truth, and we very much need it. Because right now, we're having an ad campaign with 370 contestants. Did anybody here submit an ad contest for our ad campaign? 370. We're voting on them right now, and next week we'll come up with the ad, which we will put up on buses, subways, all in every city, not every city, but as many cities as we can get across the country, and in fact around the world. This is called Operation Tip the Planet. We're trying to make 9/11, specifically the World Trade Center, about 9/11, the tipping issue. So all the other truth issues will follow. Just like when I first got into 9/11 as a Reagan Republican, it was very difficult for me, and especially after I found out all these other issues, which you're going to be hearing about this evening, and you've already heard about. So, Operation Tip the Planet, in your community, we've already raised $100,000. This is a very successful project. But what are we going to do with that money? We're going to match locally here in Atlanta 50%. So for a big billboard or 2 or 3 in Atlanta, we're going to be matching 50%. You can talk to Mikey Smith, who introduced me here. Here's Mikey. And so we can pool your money, match it with ours, and make something big happen in Atlanta along with all the other states. Whatever you do, speak out, because a time comes when our silence, our very silence on these subjects is betrayal. Thank you very, very, very much for your time. Thank you.